So I want to be mindful of time. Thank you first and foremost for having us tonight. We're really excited to be here. My name is Andrea. I make up a very small part of the Inspira team. With me, I have Katie, who will be introducing herself momentarily. Um, as I said, we're part of the Inspira Advantage team. We love doing this. We love hosting these webinars. We love being here. And we're really excited to speak to you about how to craft the perfect secondary application and what that looks like. Just before we go any further, a couple of housekeeping rules, so to speak. First and foremost, this webinar is recorded. What does that look like? Well, it looks like this. So we'll have about an hour together. We'll go over quite a few topics. So we'll be speaking about understanding the role of the secondary application, how to tailor your responses for each school, and we'll also be doing a Q&A towards the end. So you'll receive this recording within your inbox within a day or two as well. So we want to make sure that you have as much information as possible, and we want to make sure that we set you up for success to the best of our abilities. So I just want to take a quick moment before I pass it on to Katie to just chat with you about who we are. You may know us, you may not know us, and I think this is a really great time to kind of get a refresher. So as mentioned, we're Inspira Advantage. We're a globally recognized admissions consulting and test prep firm with over 16 years of experience. We specialize in helping students gain admissions to top graduate healthcare programs, including medical, residency, dental, veterinary, PA, nursing school, et cetera, with a 94% acceptance rate. So this is something we're incredibly proud of. A part of what we do and a part of what we stand for is very much starting this process as early as possible, which is why we offer something called pre-health advising for college freshmen. Our team helps students build a tailored academic timeline, including course selection and GPA strategy, finding impactful experiences like research, shadowing, clinical and non-clinical volunteering, extracurricular and leadership roles. We also help students make their applications stand out from the rest with stellar personal statements and interview prep. Now, what these do is they lay a strong foundation to help differentiate our applicants and help leave a lasting impression. In addition, our tutors provide personalized one-on-one test prep for MCAT, DAT, and GRE tests. We begin with diagnostic tests, then we move into custom study plans, inter-progress tracking, and our students on average see a 15-point increase on the MCAT with 45 plus hours of tutoring. Our 60-hour programs even include score guarantees. So for that would be for the MCAT, that would be 515, 21 for the DAT, and then 320 for the GRE. When it's actually time to apply, our all-inclusive application process offers unlimited support through the entire application cycle. This includes crafting a personalized narrative and school list, perfecting personal statements, secondary essays, secondary applications with unlimited edits, and then providing interview prep, scholarship guidance, and waitlist strategy. We're very much by our student side until they receive their acceptances. We have one goal in mind, very clear. It's to create the most competitive candidates and applications, ensuring our students shine in the competitive admissions landscape. If you'd like to know a little bit more about us, we do offer personalized consultations via video, phone, or email. No matter where you are in the process, we're here to help. We're here to support you. We want to make sure that any questions that you may have, that we either address them on a one-on-one or during that Q&A with Katie tonight. With that being said, Katie, I'd love to pass it over to you to introduce yourself and then take it from here.
Sure, thank you. My name's Katie. I am currently a resident in my 4th of 6 years in plastic and reconstructive surgery at the University of Wisconsin. That's after completing my MD degree at Virginia Commonwealth University in Richmond, Virginia. I've taken loads of educational courses, writing courses, teaching courses, and I've been on the resident and medical student review board, applicant review board, and admissions committees and interview committees and whatnot throughout the whole process. So I'm familiar with the process. I'm currently obviously an advisor or a counselor with Inspira, and I just love talking about this stuff. So thanks for having me. Hopefully tonight will be helpful. Open to whatever questions you guys have. We can chat at the end about like more open-ended Q&A type stuff. I can advance. Here we go. Okay, so Yeah, that's the right slide. So getting started. So understanding what is a secondary application, why is it important, why is it in your best interest to absolutely, shine on your secondary? Well, secondaries matter because they are kind of this individualized, tailored set of questions that schools send out after your primary application. So your primary application, of course, covers all of the basics, courses, grades, activities, and including work activities, non-clinical, volunteer, all of those things, research, all of those things should be included in your primary. Your secondary applications, most schools do very little kind of like filtering before they send these out. Usually, some do, but usually if you send a primary application to a school, you usually most often will receive a secondary application, which are these very specific and tailored questions to the school in question. And they are so important because they allow you to demonstrate how you would fit at that school. It allows you to demonstrate that your interests align with their interests and their missions. And so it's important that you understand that really what they're trying to get at with these questions are how well you are suited to do well in their program in particular. So what that means is you need to kind of read between the lines of some of these prompts. A lot of times, no matter how they ask it, in one way or another, they'll ask you, why this school? And most schools ask that. And it's important that you have, and we'll talk about a little bit more about this later in this talk, but it's important that you have well-constructed, individualized answers for each school. And they'll all kind of have similar themes, and it's important that you identify those themes so that you can answer the prompt accordingly. So some keys to standing out in your secondary application. So crafting a memorable narrative. Now, this kind of, the way this is worded maybe seems like, you're fabricating something, but really you're just trying to compose and kind of demonstrate your own narrative and passions and interests in this secondary application. So this should be a little bit more than, your primary application. There's a little bit of room for that, creating this narrative. Your secondary application should really extend that and demonstrate it in a longitudinal way. So your secondary application allows a little bit more of yourself to shine, a little bit more authenticity, because these questions are specific to you and to why you think you would fit and to what obstacles you have overcome or why you think you represent, how you contribute to their DEI initiatives, things like that, which is sometimes a question as well. So whatever narrative that ideally you've created in your primary application, you continue that and extend it into your secondary. So let's say your primary application themes were in research and innovation. That's what your interests lie in medicine. Well, your secondary application is another place for you to show that even in more detail and kind of allow yourself to stand out from the pack a little bit in that way. And then showcasing your fit. I think really this is, in my opinion, kind of the goal of the secondary application, is to show that you've done your research for the school that you're applying to, and that your views and passions and interests and missions line up with their own. So some common pitfalls that that can be hopefully avoided. So when you receive a secondary application and your responses require the balancing of multiple things. One is how fast you can get that secondary application back. So there is a component of time to this in which the faster you can get it back, because these are usually rolling admissions, the faster your application is reviewed, the faster they can come up with a decision for you. That is statistically in your best interest in terms of likelihood of being selected for an interview. However, that must be balanced with a thorough, concise, authentic, genuine, accurate responses to the secondary applications. So it shouldn't just be rushed because it gets me seen faster, and it shouldn't just be beautifully, stunningly written because that's important. It needs to be a balance of the two. So we want the best possible responses in the most efficient time period, and somehow we have to balance those things. I, as a counselor and as an advisor working with students in this predicament, often are discussing this on a personalized basis with each applicant in terms of how fast we can get these turned around. And to the quality that is important to us. Some things you can do to alleviate this time constraint while trying to write the best essays possible is to pre-write your secondary applications. So there's a few websites that have historical questions from each school's secondary application from the years prior. And there is a high likelihood that the vast majority of those get used again this year during your application cycle. And so you can pre-write some of your answers. And we'll talk more about this later as well, but it's okay to have some recycled stories or answers to questions. And there'll be some caveats to what I just said in just a few slides, but it's okay to try and start getting ahead of things, pre-write a little bit, with the caveat being that you will have to adjust, edit, and specialize for each school. So we're balancing quality of our writing with timing and efficiency. The other thing, and this goes back to the point I was just making, avoiding generic answers. This is so important. It seems like, if I have a good answer for one school, that should be probably a good answer for the other school. And sometimes that works, but very rarely do generic answers get you through to where you want to be in the interview process. As a reviewer of applications, I can tell when an answer, I and everyone like me, I imagine, can tell when you are recycling answers and this is just a paragraph that you've created for another school that you've placed in our secondary application. It's very apparent because you don't list any specifics to our program. It's just, you don't list demographics of the city that you're going to be living in, things that are, relevant and perhaps would help you shine in your secondary application. It's just this generic answer that, it seems to me, perhaps I could be wrong, it seems to me when we get these generic answers that this is just a recycled kind of answer that you haven't really edited at all to specify to our program. So avoid generic answers. Even though it saves you time, try to make them customized to the program that you're applying to. So just in that way, crafting a strong response then. So being specific, this is so important. This is the anti-generic answer kind of bullet point, which is go onto their websites, find some programs that you're interested in that relate to the narrative or the passions that you have. So if you are interested, if your whole primary and secondary application otherwise demonstrate your interest in helping, underserved communities, then find some programs that medical school does. Almost every medical school has some form of outreach to underserved populations. Find some specific names of programs in which medical students can get involved, list them, demonstrate your interest in the school. It is so easy to just Google and find some programs that they're working on. Find some articles about new research opportunities that they're starting at this school. So there's so many ways you can specify your answers for your secondaries, and that's so crucial. Providing clear examples that highlight your strengths. So depending on the question, it may ask tell us about a time when whatever, and this is definitely a time for show, not tell. So it's much better to demonstrate longitudinal committed interest in whatever it may be, whether that's research or, like I said, helping underserved populations or whatever it may be. It's much better to provide these longitudinal narrative examples as opposed to just saying, I did relisting your CV. Basically, I did these 10 things over the course of 3 months. And, those kind of less longitudinal, less perhaps significant interactions are not as important to demonstrate here. What you really want to show is the longitudinal interest in the field. And then keep your responses concise yet meaningful. So really what this bullet point means to me is don't add a bunch of fluff. Honestly, it doesn't add to my understanding of you or add to the review of your secondary application if there is fluff in your application, because it just makes it harder for me to understand what your points are. So you don't get points for having a longer answer. So if your answer is shorter but concise and meaningful, then that is better for me personally as a reviewer than something that's longer, but I have to kind of wade through a bunch of filler. So I've already touched on this a bit, but just going a little bit more into detail about school specificity. So again, we're avoiding generic answers. I don't want you to just plain old recycle answers for any of your secondaries, ideally. It's okay to have short, like a story, a time when you overcame an obstacle. It's okay to have a kind of canned response for that, or at least a story for that. But every answer should be modified in some way to highlight the school's mission, the school's special programs, what values that they say that they want to emphasize. And honestly, among all of these schools, there's probably only more than a handful, but there's probably about a handful of like specific missions or values that places hold. So just look those up. They are on their website, and tailor your responses to those values. It's perfectly reasonable to read about faculty research that's going on there. You can even list it by name. Culture, campus culture, or any social activities that you've seen online that you would be interested in being involved with. And like I mentioned, student organizations or outreach groups that are listed by name, honestly, is always great too, to list in your secondary. Demonstrating genuine interest. So this is really just like showing how your values and passions align with the schools, and that like why you would be a good fit there. And hopefully you've applied to schools that you would be a good fit at. Makes it easier to answer these questions. But this is just demonstrating like, hey, you guys have a value and a passion and interest in this, and look at all these things that I've done to demonstrate that I have that same passion and interest, and how I would be able to contribute once I was hopefully a medical student there. And I think this is our break slide.
So sorry about that. It took a second for it to unmute me. So I just want to take a really quick moment to do a check-in. What this looks like. Is there any questions so far? Is there any other any slides you'd like us to elaborate on, or any sort of points? I want to just make sure we give you a minute to get those in. We will have a Q&A towards the end of tonight's session. So if you cannot get them in, or you don't have any questions thus far, totally okay. Again, we have that Q&A period, right, where it's really your opportunity to get some time with Katie, whether that be to chat about secondary applications, primary applications, interviews. I know, Katie, you have a lot of knowledge on that topic as well, so we want to make sure we do that as well. And just want to take a quick moment to say, just as a thank you for having us here tonight, we wanted to offer a 10% off on any one of our programs. So that's 10 off web, any sort of one of our programs. If you are interested, scan that QR code, book a one-on-one, and then one of my awesome colleagues and Katie's awesome colleagues will be able to sit down with you and sort of chat about your needs, your goals, and any other questions you may have. I do not see any questions in the chat. Amelia, is there any questions from the group? We'll give her a moment.
Oops. Sorry, technical difficulties. Okay.
It's okay.
I'll repeat them back to you if that's okay.
Absolutely.
Okay.
How to avoid repetitiveness in all answers.
Okay. Do you have any tips for avoiding being repetitive in your answers, since the questions kind of aim at similar topics?
Yeah, it can be hard. Sometimes you do find yourself, even the best writers I find sometimes tend to have some redundancy. I try to, if you feel like questions are kind of overlapping in theme, I try to give them a different piece every time. So like give them a different advertisement for yourself with each answer. So perhaps you don't use all of your points if you find that the questions, obviously you have all the questions in front of you before you start writing or finish writing. If you find that two of the questions seem redundant, or kind of like I would use the same answer for each, maybe break up your answer so that you have kind of a different response, but it's still demonstrating all of your points, if that makes sense. So sometimes I have let's say 2 or 3 examples of why I would fit this school's values. And it's like interest in research. I'm using the same examples over and over because I can't think of any right off the top of my head, but interest in research, interest in underserved populations, interest in, I don't know, like some specific area that they put a bunch of funding into, like liver transplants or something like that, whatever. My research is in that, let's say. So let's say I have these 3 answers. Perhaps in the first question, I give 2 examples. My general research interest and this specific interest that I have. And then in the second answer, I talk about the underserved population interests or passions that I have and what examples I have from my CV to demonstrate that interest. So sometimes you can break them up a little bit so that you give them different pieces in each answer if you feel like the answer is going to be redundant. At the same time, understand that sometimes there's just going to be some redundancy, and hopefully that like you can reframe it or reword it in a way that's not so obviously repeated, but it can be hard for sure. That would be my only tip for like trying to break it up and make it so it's not like exactly the same answer.
Awesome. Thank you. And kind of going off of that, is it okay to bring things back from your primary application? So say in your personal statement, you talked about overcoming a challenge. Can you then use that again, or should you make a whole new example? Like how often do they set them down side by side, or is it okay to reinforce an idea?
Yeah, I think depending on how much detail you went into during your primary application, it is acceptable to use it again in your secondary. There's kind of two things that you're balancing here. One is that your secondary theoretically should give you an additional opportunity to shine. So the idea being that in your primary, you've shown this one area of resilience or obstacle or whatever you've overcome. And then in your secondary, it gives you a second opportunity to advertise yourself. Here's another way in which I am qualified and resilient and would make a good medical student. So in one way, it would be nice if you could come up with a second example so that you have just like more evidence for them to see that you are qualified and resilient and capable. On the other hand, if you feel strongly about that first example and you feel like you have room and ability in your secondary application to expand on it, then I think it's reasonable. So if this is a really meaningful obstacle that you've overcome in your primary that you've maybe just touched on or kind of alluded to, in your primary application, and you feel like you have the room and capacity, like emotional and like introspective capacity to expand on it in your secondary, like as long as it's different and giving additional information, I think it's okay to use again. I wouldn't use the exact same story in the exact same way because I think you're really losing an opportunity to advertise yourself, if that makes sense. But if you can add some introspective or retrospective component analysis, like growth or something in the secondary that kind of adds to the primary application story, I think that would be acceptable. But just thinking of those two things, like if you use a different story, it's additional data and information and advertisement basically for yourself. But if you feel like you can, that opportunity was so meaningful for you that you can expand on it and really demonstrate some like authentic kind of growth or learning from it, then I think it would be acceptable to use in the secondary.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Perfect.
I'm going to check to see if there's any more questions quick. That's okay. Any more questions that we got? No, are we staying for the end? No. Okay. I think we'll save the rest for the end if that's okay.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Katie, back to you.
Okay, we'll jump back into it. So perfecting your writing style, this I think can be tricky. It's hard, honestly, to write really meaningful, kind of different stories over and over again. These take more time, I think, in editing than people expect. It's kind of, in my mind, like a personal statement in a way in which you think you can just jot it down and maybe do one or two edits and get it out. Sometimes it takes longer than that to really think through it, make sure it's authentic, genuine, but also concise, meaningful, introspective. You want it to show growth and like reflection, of course, as well. It shouldn't just be listing activities that you've done. And so trying to balance all of those things in writing that has a time limit can be really challenging. But I just think give it enough time so that you have time to make some edits and look and, take 2 days away and look at it again before you submit. So it's for all of those reasons, it's important, of course. The other thing I'll advise, the points here, avoid using overly complex language. So especially when you're talking about medical stuff, the people that are reviewing your applications often have experience in medicine, most often have experience in medicine as already. So if you're going to talk about medical jargon or language, be really confident that you are using things correctly and that it's absolutely correct, because that can be a little bit of an orange flag if, like, say you're listing something, you're telling a story in which it requires some medical jargon, but perhaps it's used incorrectly, or the situation doesn't quite make sense. It can be really kind of, it's hard to read that and separate yourself from it. So just make sure that you're using simple, clear, concise language. If you can avoid using like specific medical examples, I usually would recommend that unless you're absolutely confident that this was, cut and clear. And then edit carefully. So make sure that this is, again, going back to the fluff. The fluff really is not helpful for your application. I would much rather read a shorter, more concise answer than something that's way long with a bunch of fluff that I just feel like could be edited out. The other thing I would add to this is grammar and spelling errors. So it seems so obvious, and I shouldn't even have to say it, but it happens every single application. I would say so many applications, I would say, not every single, so many applications in which there are simple grammatic or spelling errors that could be spell checked and just weren't. And sometimes it happens when you're copying things over from places, and I understand that. And no one holds it against you like life or death, but it's just such an easy way to demonstrate attention to detail and organization and honestly care about the application. So just be really careful that you're triple checking everything. Please. Okay. Maximizing your impact in your application. So this is really all about, in my opinion, advertising, not in a way that is like untrue, of course, but just like showing yourself in the best possible light. So often that means like you are using verbiage that demonstrates your engagement and activity in whatever experience you're describing. Again, we talked about aligning your own experiences and interests with the schools that you're applying to. We talked about show, don't tell. This is important. I don't want to read a list of your CV bullet points. I want to understand how that experience, how that one, maybe two experiences affected you and your growth and your learning and your preparedness to be a medical student. So I don't want to read, a list of your, oh no, we lost her. Oh, I lost my presentation.
Oh,
Anyway.
That was odd. Okay, let's bring the presentation back. Sorry.
It's okay. I was just saying, just about the show, don't tell. Just make sure that you are demonstrating whatever values and not just saying that you have them. That's important. Let's see. Okay, and we all already kind of covered ensuring that each response adds to the depth of your application. So this was kind of addressed in that question from the group, which is like, if you find an opportunity to either repeat yourself or provide new data, then generally it's in your best interest to provide new, strong data to support your argument that you're going to be a great medical student. So instead of giving one example in two different ways, it's often in your best interest if you can think of two strong examples to give them more stories, more narrative, more data to support your advocacy for yourself that you will be a great student. Here are two different ways that I've overcome obstacles, or, two different strengths that I have, and here are some examples to show that. So other ways to strengthen your responses, we talked about this. Personalization is so key, and that's both to the school that you're applying to, but also introspectively, like retrospect, like genuine answers for yourself, not just what you think the reader wants to hear, because that is so apparent usually when someone is writing something that's just like, I just think that the person reading this is going to want this answer. And to me, that is a little bit of like a disingenuine kind of thing. I want to hear from you. The secondary is like really like a kind of an extension of your personal statement, and that it should be authentic to you. And that should make me want to meet you and offer you an interview so I can meet you. So personalization, both on the side of like making sure it's accounting for the school, but also on your side as well. We talked about a bit already about depth over breadth, really just meaning I would much rather hear about, one experience that was over the course of 3 years, once a month, as opposed to another one or two other experiences in which they were, 20 hours over the course of 1 month. That really, the longitudinal experience demonstrates your devotion and determination and interests and passions in this field. So ideally, those are the experiences that you're focusing on, and help tell your narrative. And then we talked about this already. Authenticity matters. being genuine in your responses here is kind of the key, in my opinion, to the reviewers advocating for you. If I can feel like a genuine connection in either your personal statement, your primary, whatever, and or your secondary responses, I feel like your secondary responses are not canned, recycled responses, or generic responses, then it often makes me want to advocate for that person more strongly when it comes time to make decisions about interviews. So these will definitely come up. There can be really challenging prompts, and they can be challenging for a few reasons. So I find the most challenging prompts to be ones in which there's not a clear answer. So occasionally you'll get a prompt that's like, your neighbor has an infant and doesn't want them to be vaccinated. You're a pediatrician. What do you do? Like, you're at a dinner party. They bring it up. What do you say? And, this and other examples like it, kind of like an ethical or moral or social dilemma, can be hard to answer because you don't want to lean so far one way you lose the person, and you don't want to lean so far the other way that you kind of relinquish your medical knowledge on the topic. And at this point in your career where you're just applying to medical school, you may not feel like you have the authority or the medical knowledge backing to really make strong points here. At least I didn't feel that way. So I think those can be challenging. However, know a few things. Again, authenticity is important. So they want to see that you're able to be yourself and actually talk about how you would talk to this person if this were a real life situation. So it demonstrates a few things, all these questions, not just the example that I gave, but it demonstrates that you're able to work within your community and have this interpersonal communication skills where it doesn't have to just be black or white. It doesn't have to be your baby gets all the vaccines or else, So they really want you to work within that gray area. And so many of these challenging prompts function that way, where they give you a gray area and you have to negotiate your way through it. And they want to understand your thought process. That happens in the interviews a lot too, to be honest, but I feel like those prompts can be really challenging. So my advice is use Google if you need to. If you need some actual numbers and stats, do some reading, see if you can provide that in your answer. That's totally acceptable. But be genuine. How would you go about this if this was your neighbor? How would you talk to them with the knowledge that you have at your fingertips or in your background, and explain to me your thought process? And that's usually a really helpful and clear way to help me understand how you would negotiate that. Questions about adversity. These can be challenging because some folks have differing levels of what adversity means for them. So I've worked with clients and myself that have struggled through really kind of like complex and emotionally charged issues in their background, and that it perhaps was a huge adversity and a huge obstacle to overcome, but it can be really challenging to talk about comfortably with interviewers. And so sometimes it's important to think about how a reviewer would interpret these answers. So it's ideal to think of a kind of more easily digested, I don't want to say simple either, because I don't want you to just say, oh, I got a C on a test once and that was my adversity. So somewhere between the two. If you can talk about, if it's a personal thing and you can talk about it comfortably and intelligently and show growth and resilience through it, then that's obviously totally fine. These can be very personal answers, and that is okay, as long as you find like a mature kind of introspective way to discuss it and show all these things that we're trying to show: interpersonal intelligence, resilience, growth, things like that. And then the why us question we've talked about at length. I think really this needs to be specific to the school, and hopefully goes without saying, you shouldn't really be mentioning prestige or rank. Whatever you think the worst medical school in the country is, if you graduated from it, you're a doctor. So, the prestige and rank really doesn't make a difference. Shouldn't make too much of a difference in terms of, maybe it makes one in your mind, but it shouldn't make a difference on paper in terms of how you're answering these questions. So make sure that you're finding their specific interests, and make sure that you demonstrate that you're a good fit for those. Strategies for a stronger application. We talked about this. Align your experiences with their values. A structured approach for each answer. So this usually consists of clearly identifying the issue or the problem, clearly identifying how you dealt with it, what strategies you took to overcome it or address it, and then kind of finally like what you learned or took from it or how you changed or grew from it. That's the general kind of structure most of these kind of problem-focused answers rely on. As long as you've addressed all of those things, usually it's a strong-ish answer, and then using the show, don't tell kind of mentality. And then we already talked about proofreading very carefully to make sure there's no spelling errors or grammar errors, and improving readability and making sure things are concise and clear. So taking your secondary to the next level, so connecting your experiences. This is, again, just like a show, don't tell kind of thing in which you say, you know, I really love this program because, I mean, in better words than this, I really love this program because of your emphasis on DEI. And here is all of the things in my application. Here's all the things in my application, all the experiences that I've had that I've pursued specifically to encourage this in my own life and in programs that I've functioned in. Here is, you know, a leadership, perhaps like a leadership experience in which I was DEI chair, and I did these steps to encourage this kind of diversity and inclusion in this club that I was in, or whatever it may be. So just making sure that your experiences align and you can demonstrate how. And there can be ways where you can kind of reframe things. Maybe that's not exactly you know, maybe like an experience is not immediately directly comparable to you, but you can usually find ways to make things work. Sometimes it's challenging, but you can usually find ways to make things work. So sometimes the question comes up about like, why would you want to come to this geographic location? And you don't have any family in that area, and you don't have any really good reasons why you want to live in that area. Well, look up their demographics. Do they have underserved populations that you've worked with in the past that you're interested in continuing to work with? You can talk about that. Look at, you know, perhaps their college, their college social culture, and, you know, are there things about that you're interested in? Is there particular research in that area that can't be done elsewhere? So like that happens where I'm at in Wisconsin. So just try and, you can maybe need to think outside the box to find your relationships, but try and find your relationships and their experiences. And then we talked about maintaining a strong narrative. This just really helps us. It's really like a way to keep things very palatable for the reviewer, in that it's easy to digest if I can see that there is a string of passions and interests throughout the whole application. And that doesn't mean you have to be one-dimensional and just say, my application is about research. Everything has to be about research. That's not the case, but it is nice when there is kind of an understandable like chronology to your activities. So perhaps, you know, I like research, I'm interested in research, and that's how I got involved in this clinical opportunity. And then you can tell me about that. And so this narrative that kind of explains how things occurred and in what order is sometimes helpful. And some final tips: double check / triple check for clarity, conciseness, school-specific details. Like I said, mentioning specific names of programs I think is really helpful in your application. Sometimes I recommend that folks take a couple days to stop looking at things so that they can come back in 2 or 3 days with a fresh set of eyes, trying to interpret it as a reviewer themselves and make whatever changes they need to make. Ensuring your answers add depth beyond your primary application. So this, we mentioned, like if you're going to mention something in your secondary that was already mentioned in your primary, make sure it adds a new component. Make sure it adds some depth to your character and isn't just repeating the story. And then submit early. This is just maximizing chances. This is just a numbers game. Like I said, we're going to balance submitting early with quality of the work. So those things need to both be in your mind at the same time.
So we are almost at the end of tonight's presentation, but before we hop into the Q&A, because I know there's some additional questions, we just want to ask you a favor. We love doing these. We want to continue doing them. But with that being said, we want to make sure that we are offering even better guidance and continuing to improve and just making any future session better than the one before. So if you could take a quick moment, scan the QR code, I promise you takes you back to a questionnaire, about 5 questions long, I think. And we'd love to hear from you. Honest, open feedback. We want to make sure that we are providing the most value possible. You could speak to the content. You could speak to if there's any additional ideas. You could speak to, hey, if you want another webinar from us, let us know. All of that. We are really excited to be doing these, and again, just looking to continuously improve and offer better guidance every time. With that being said, I'd love to open up the floors to the Q&A. Amelia, are you there?
Yes, I am. And real quick, we're having trouble with the QR code. It wasn't letting people scan. I don't know if it's because it's too small on our screen to see or
That might
what
be.
But would you be able to send it out after maybe?
Yes, that would be, we can definitely do that. Not a problem.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll scan for questions real quick.
Thank you.
What questions for Diego? You have one?
On average, how many questions?
On average, how long or how many questions are the secondaries? Do you have like a number in mind?
That's a good question. Honestly, they do vary quite a bit. I would say minimum is 2, maximum is probably close to 6, but that can vary a lot. And how long the responses are vary a lot as well. So sometimes schools will do this thing where they're like, if you're interested in applying to say like our rural tract at this other location as a part of our school, tell us more about that and why. Some of those questions you don't have to answer if you're not interested in that track. And that's totally fine. You don't have to be interested in every track that they offer. So some questions are like not extraneous, but like only if they apply to you. Most schools have at least 2, maybe 3 questions that are sent to everyone. So that's usually like, something along the lines of usually like a why this school, how do your values align with our own, and then some third like character-based question. That's probably what I would say the average is, plus or minus some like school-specific things underneath. But like I said, if you Google there, I can't remember the website off the top of my head, but there are some websites that have like the secondaries like from previous years listed there for each school in the country, including DO school, MD and DO schools. And you can just look at some examples of what they typically ask.
So I'd love to.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, I'd love to piggyback off of that, and I just put it in the chat, Amelia, and we'll share it in the follow-up as well. It's actually, we have a very comprehensive list. It was from 2013, oh my gosh, from 2024 to 2025. So this is actually the last round of medical, like the secondary essay prompts. It's extremely, extremely, extremely comprehensive. I believe there's 100 or so prompts on there, maybe even more. If you click that link, you'll be able to see. It'll give you access to it. So I want to make sure that I leave that with your group as well. And again, these are from last cycle, but I think it'll give you everyone a little bit of an understanding of what those main prompts are. Of course, they change in some cases, but again, as Katie was saying, there's ones that are basically the same every year, just tweaked around a little bit, minor word changes.
Awesome, thank you. I'm going to check it with other.
Yeah, there's a question in the chat actually.
Oh, okay, we'll let you go.
Yeah, how are the interviews usually structured?
So, good question. There are a few structures. That are available for use in interviews, and it depends on the school. I would say the 2 most common are some type of interview panel versus MMI format, which is like multiple mini interviews. So the MMI format is, and we have, I think, webinars on this as well, but just as like a brief kind of introduction, The MMI format is like usually there's like 8 to 10 rooms. You spend like 5 to 10 minutes in each room, and they're individual prompts. A lot of times they are not just like interview questions. Sometimes they are interactive, like, you know, work with a partner to solve this puzzle, and they want to understand and hear and listen to your thought process and your you know, communication skills and interpersonal skills. So there are a lot of like activity based prompts or rooms, and then there are also like character based or like ethical rooms where you're like, okay, like before you walk into the room, there's a prompt that's like, okay, you're seeing this teenage patient for birth control and she doesn't want her parents to know. Go into the room and talk to her. Something like that. So you kind of have to like act it out, almost like a scenario, like a hypothetical scenario. And then sometimes they're just like interview questions. So that's the MMI format. A lot of schools use that. And I think that is actually like a really helpful interview technique because it lets us see a little bit more about you than just like how you answer questions. But the other option is like a generic kind of interview panel, either with one or two, or sometimes a group of other interviewers. And that's more of a like traditional format where they've just got some questions in front of them and they write down how you answer and then discuss afterwards. So usually schools employ one or of those two techniques.
Awesome, thanks. This individual says, great, thank you for your time. Amelia, we'll let you have the floor again.
Okay, we got another one. Is there a general rule of thumb for how long it should take before you like finalize and submit your secondary application? Like, is there a window where it's too fast or too long before we submit?
Really good question. And this is a question I get a lot from clients or students that I work with. I don't think there is any too fast window. I don't think schools are really even keeping track of that per se. They just like review as they receive generally. But there is too long probably. It's not a hard and fast number where I'm like, okay, 10 days is too long. I would say within 2 weeks is totally acceptable. I try to encourage folks to get things back within a week of receiving your secondary. Sometimes what happens is just the way that they tend to do things is that they pile them all together. So you receive 10 secondaries at once and it's just not possible to get them all back within a week. And that happens. I think a good goal is within 2 weeks, with the caveat being the sooner the better. Of course, balancing both the quality and efficiency with which you write them. So I would say within 2 weeks is my kind of generic answer. I always encourage clients and students to pre-write their secondary. So using that link that we sent out, like you should, for all this, as soon as you submit your primary, you should start prioritizing what schools you're most interested in and pre-writing their secondaries, and then just keep going till you receive some and you're going to have to start getting them back. But pre-writing is like an essential tool and it helps you stay on top of them when they start coming in faster.
And what generally is the time frame for the switch around between your primary application being submitted and then your secondaries coming towards you?
So sure. So I always encourage my clients to, if possible, if at all possible, to submit your primary on the day that they release that, like, you can start submitting. So that changes usually changes a little bit each year, like what day that is specifically. But if you submit in that time frame, or like within that day or the next day, as soon as things can be submitted for your primary application, usually the turnaround is like a month, where you'll start getting some secondaries. But sometimes it's even sooner, truthfully, but it's usually around, 3 weeks or so where you start getting some secondaries back. And then there'll be like kind of a surge, maybe around a month, between 1 and 2 months, where you start getting kind of like, if you apply to a lot of schools, you'll start getting a chunk of them back at the same time. And then it'll kind of taper off.
Thank you. That's helpful. I'm going to see if there's any other questions real quick. What do we got? Anyone? Okay, I've got another one then. Is there, or have you noticed a difference between MD and DO schools for the types of questions asked? I know I'll go and look on the thing too, but in general, is there something that stands out to you?
Yeah, not really. Honestly, most of the questions are very similar. The only thing you'll absolutely have to answer is if you're applying to DO schools, why DO over MD? There's really no questions like that on the MD applications, but if you're specifically applying to a DO school, they want to know why. And it shouldn't just be that, I think I can get in easier or something like obvious like that. Like it should be, like you should have experience. Obviously you have to have a DO letter, and you should have experience with osteopathic medicine in one way or another. And you should be able to firmly support why you are interested in attending a DO school as opposed to an MD school. That is one question that you'll absolutely have to answer and is different between the two, but otherwise the question prompts tend to be similar.
Okay, thank you. Any last questions?
I understand our secondaries, like, be required by every medical school or just some, or it's all just some?
Are secondaries known to be required by every medical school, or do only some use them, or how does that work?
Yeah, I would say if not all, I can't think of any that don't use it. I don't want to be wrong, but I'm almost certain that if not all, the vast, vast majority of schools send secondaries. And unfortunately, like the reason for that is because it is an additional fee for them. Like they make some money off of sending, you have to pay to send secondaries back. So it is in their best interest to send secondaries to basically everyone that sends primaries. Now, that's not always the case. Not everyone that sends a primary to every school will get a secondary back. Some places do some filtering where they're like, either your scores or your GPA or just like based on the answers in your primary application, you don't really fit what our interests are for the school, how they determine that, who knows, subjective. But so not every primary you submit, you will receive a secondary back always. But I think just about every school has a secondary application for you to complete.
Do the costs tend to vary based on school to school? Are they around the same amount?
I think they're around the same amount. I want to say they're like between 50 and 100, at least when I went through it. I haven't looked at it recently, but it's something like that.
Okay, thank you. Any last questions? I know they said it could be about other things too.
Absolutely.
Yeah, anything application, interview, whatever based, I'm happy to help.
Anything? Are we good?
And you can always
Okay.
follow up with us afterwards as well. So if anybody has any questions, I know we threw a lot of information at you. So in the next couple of days or weeks, or even as you're going through this process, shoot us a message. I can put you in contact with Katie. We can find out. We can get your questions answered. No problems whatsoever.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for having us. Great questions. Come to our other webinars if you're interested. We're always happy to help.
Absolutely. Took the words right out of my mouth. And Amelia, thank you so much for working with us and bringing this to life.
Of course. Thank you guys so much for your time and expertise. We really appreciate you coming and talking with us. So thank you.
Absolutely. I hope everyone has a wonderful evening. Bye, everyone.
Thanks.